Now it's the time for the first panel of this event, and this is going to be profound. We're going to be talking about the intersection of education and Web3. And for that, I would like to welcome to the stage Evin McMullen from Learning Economy and Internet of Education. Evin? No. Come in. Also, Andy Tudhope from Kernel. Next, we also have Chris Purifoy from Disco XYZ, and our excellent moderator, Colin Reynolds. So pay attention to this panel because it will prep you on how to experience this conference, and also it will help us figure out what we mean when we say education in Web3. Take it away.
Awesome, thank you. GM, am I coming through okay? So we'll just clarify just quickly. I'm Colin Reynolds with Learning Economy and Internet of Education. If you want to just reintroduce yourself to make sure we know who you're associated with.
Yeah, I'm Chris Purifoy with Learning Economy Foundation.
I'm Andy Tudhope with Kernel.
GM, everybody. I'm Evin McMullen with Disco.
So we're really excited to talk a little more about education today, and the panel here, unfortunately Simona Pop was not able to make it, so tear for her, but we know she's well, and we look forward to seeing her again IRL. We're just excited to bring a little more clarity to what we mean when we say education. I think there's, as a teacher, an educator, administrator, my whole career, moving into the Web3 space has been a dramatic shift in the way we think about education and the way we talk about the way individuals learn globally. And so in the Web3 space, when I started getting in, people were very often saying, oh, education in Web3, great, like teach me tools, teach me this, like I want to know about Web3. And it's so much more than just the tooling in Web3 and the relationships in Web3. There are multiple industries of education, and we're hoping today to kind of create some of those pathways and talk about what some of those differences are, some of the infrastructure that is being built to help systems of education, when think academia, higher education, boot camps, that kind of stuff. So then also we mean workshops in Web3, which we have a co-creation space here that has a ton of great workshops where you can learn more about specific types of tooling, specific things related to DAOs and to smart contracts. And then we have education as it relates to individuals and how they associate with their identity in not just Web3, but in the real world. I think we're starting to merge the identity of what it is online and what it is in person, right? We are here having experiences, and that is part of your identity and part of your educational space. So we want to talk a little bit about identity, and who better than the disco queen, Evin McMullen, to share a little bit with us about identity and an individual's ability to learn and earn in a global economy. So Evin, talk to us a little bit about identity and how we bring these worlds together, education, in real life, Web3, digital metaverse, all of it. Where do we start?
Oh, with delight, Colin. This is going to be fun. So when we think about identity, often we think about being a function of someone else's system, right? The Department of Motor Vehicles owns your driver's license. Gmail owns your email. Twitter owns your handle. And so the concept of identity in Web3 can be much more personal. In the same way that we can own and control our tokens, we can own and control the traits that describe us, the accomplishments that we've achieved, the capabilities that we have developed. And so in the context of education, we currently are very limited in the same way that we are with our other identifiers owned by other parties, because we have only a few kinds of achievements that are globally recognized. Things like diplomas, things like transcripts, but in the Web3 future, our ability to document and verifiably prove our aptitude can be so much more. From being able to capture your achievements down to the assignment level, being able to reward or recognize students for partial completion of degrees, the ability to garner provable achievements because you've mastered various different skill sets that may not yet even be taught in school. And so with this new ability to have true ownership of ourselves and our capabilities, we need to be able to capture more than just those financial capabilities that we already have today. So I think what's really exciting about the work that folks like the Learning Economy are doing is making sure that these new superpowers are distributed more democratically than the first set of capabilities that brought us all here. And what that means is building experiences for younger learners, building experiences for people who have non-traditional paths to expertise and achievement. And so I think talking about education today invites us to focus on the human part of human coordination tools.
Yeah, and I think that the identity, as you were saying, is like there are so many different elements, and when you focus on the learning experiences that are happening, that's one part of it. I think when you learn a new tool, when you engage in an experience, that is in of itself an experience. But there are ways that teachers and planners and anybody who is creating curriculum thinks about what those experiences will look like, and thinks about the way that we teach critical thinking. And I think, Andy, you and Colonel have a fantastic model that really focuses on the mental models of learning, the mental models of thinking, the mental models of acquiring information. So share a little bit with us about how an individual and their identity can be sort of taught through experiences that help them think differently about any kind of learning experiences, which includes Web3.
Sure. So I think that one of the opportunities before us is to consider which comes first, right? Like there is this old Bitcoin maxim, don't trust, verify. And while there is an enormous amount of power in that kind of saying, the question becomes, okay, by what means does one verify, right? And we understand that there are certain technical protocols by which that happens, but there has to be an understanding, right? So it's almost as if education is prior to verification. It depends upon it. And in some very real sense, the idea that one moves from education to verification is at the heart of kernel. So rather than thinking about how can we enhance outcome-based education, how can we prove that we have learned certain things, how can we continue the cycle of needing to verify against others that we have fulfilled certain requirements. Instead, we go the other way around and think, well, what is it that I really want to learn and why? When we are thinking about the why first and how second, then you can start thinking about the sort of patterns that could really de-school society. Right? I think that one of the critical things to acknowledge about the modern education system, whether it's here in Europe, whether it's in Africa, North America, South America, it doesn't really matter. All across the world, one of the things that we really struggle with is this notion that we are graded, right, and assessed. And the word itself, it literally means made flat, right? To grade something is to make flat and the same, and that's kind of what the education system enacts on all of us. It doesn't really matter where you come from. And I think that the alternative to that is this heterogeneous, massively differentiated, and rather emergent space. I know that a lot of the work that Disco is doing is based on the ability to represent oneself dynamically, that it's not limited to one particular moment, one particular credential, one particular way of proving. And I think that has to be primary in any discussion about education, because who we are is constantly changing. What we're learning is constantly changing. You said yourself, every moment in this kind of conference, but in general, every moment in life is a learning opportunity. And when you see that, and when you begin to recognize that, in fact, we are deeply and essentially learning and moral creatures, then you can come into this notion that, look, we don't need to build systems that school, grade, and verify people. We need to build environments that grow and cultivate creativity and a certain dynamic approach to learning that is not limited to one particular cryptographic protocol, one particular hash, one particular key, one particular and reductive representation.
I love the way that you talked about grading and what that actually means. As the product of American public schools, I know that grading was a game to me, was figuring out how I need to do and say the right things in order to get the right grade that would allow me to move on to the next thing. And if I had some creative thought or some sort of divergent thinking related to an activity, I needed to push that aside in order to get the right answer so that I could move on. And so I hear you talking about a way that we can sort of empower from the ground up individuals to think as individuals and share their ideas openly and freely, as opposed to what is it that I need to say to get the outcome that I think I'm supposed to get, right? And so there's all these bespoke systems that I think learners and earners and humans just in general go through, right? The context matters a lot. The protocols matter a lot. The tooling matters a lot. But there's this sort of like Frankenstein type model right now that individuals are going through. And I know groups like Learning Economy are working to actually create a more cohesive infrastructure that allows an individual to participate in a global ecosystem more seamlessly. So Chris, talk to us a little bit about some of the work of Learning Economy and the way these disparate parts are being brought together.
Yes, you know, it's interesting. When you think about Web3 in education, there's always it's generally in these circuits that you think about educating about Web3, which is good and important, and education in every silo is important. But when you zoom out a little bit and you start thinking about education more holistically, as being lifelong learning, whether it's traditional education, non-traditional, starting, you know, essentially from, you know, cradle to gray, you know, that lifelong learning journey is really empowering. It's agency. Right? I mean, it matters in refugee camps, it matters in traditional spaces, it matters as an adult, it matters as a child. And again, I think we all, no matter where we're from, we would all probably beat the drum of education has failed us in some ways, right? Because education generally is something that happens to us. It's not something that we drive, it's not something we have agency over. And I think that Web3, or Ed3, if you will, offers a real opportunity to rethink the way that works. And it's very much the way they started it here. You know, it starts with identity, right? It starts with decentralizing education around the individuals. So it's kind of a paradox here, but let's actually center it on the individual, and that'll decentralize it from the world, right? Because right now it's all centralized around the issuers, and we don't have our credentials. And so when we can, everyone can have their own self-sovereign ID, and they can connect to that ID of verifiable credentials. You know, verifiable credentials is this new thing, you know, that I'm sure a lot of you know about, but in the blockchain world, you know, it's not talked about as much because it doesn't really require a blockchain, you know? But there are incredible standards with W3C and others who are starting to look at this and say, we can create envelopes. You know, you can imagine a king or a queen that wanted to send a message across land. They would stamp, you know, their stamp on top of an envelope, and if it was broken when they reached the other side, they knew it was tampered with. In a similar way, we can create verifiable credentials. Envelopes is really what that is. And inside of it, we can store anything, you know, whether it's, you know, a learning history, whether it's, you know, down to the course level, like she said, whether it's, you know, a degree, whether it's a course, whether it's something non-traditional, a job history, and so on and so forth, right? And from this, you can start to extrapolate into something really exciting. You know, we like to call them not verifiable credentials, we like to call them programmable verifiable credentials. You know, PVC, right? Which I think is interesting because PVC pipes were a very early standard, a very global standard that has helped us create infrastructure for the world. And I think in a similar way, when you think about the future of education and employment, programmable verifiable credentials will let us build a whole infrastructure. You know, we call it the Internet of Education, and it's a multi-layered ecosystem, right? There are actually 8 layers to it, and I won't go into them all. But, you know, it's built on one ethos, which is centered around the learners, right? And through that, you start to create a system where the credentials can carry on with the individual and digital wallets. You know, this is a lot of the great work that's happening here with verifiable credentials, with identity. And from there, you can start to stack on top of that many layers of value. Right? So then you can start to map the pathways. You know, one of the incredible opportunities of the future here, and, you know, and I want to encourage anyone that's developing in this, decentralized future at all to think about coming into education and employment, because we need your help. You know, we don't have as many developers, but there is just huge potential and incredible opportunity inside of that space, and the world's hungry for it, even, you know, top down and bottom up. You know, it's no longer just kind of a decentralized swell. It's happening on the government level now. You know, people are recognizing that what they need, you know, in light of everything that happened with COVID, everyone, you know, education, it virtualized, and all of a sudden what could have been a 10-year roadmap has accelerated to a 2 to 3 to 5-year roadmap where people are ready to make change, and this really does offer the solution. And so you can start, you know, packing on top of that pathways where people can start to take agency and understand, like a GPS, how to map their life through their learning journey. You know, I can map myself to a great sandwich in Barcelona. It's really easy. I type it on my phone and it tells me, and I turn-by-turn directions to it. You know, we are, you know, developing a future where you can do that with learning. And you say, I want to be a nurse. Great. You need to learn ratios, and you can do it online. And here's a local workshop, and here's a program you can go learn, and here's a scholarship, and all the way to a job. And you can start using these pathways applications to map your life and simulate your life, right? So when I was a kid, I thought I was a bad kid because I didn't like traditional education. I was creative, and I was building things, and I was, doing my chores in innovative ways. And there was nobody there to tell me that creative thinking and ingenuity and cognitive abilities were really going to serve me in the future. But that critical thinking mattered. And what we can start to do is, at a very early age, we can start to understand the skills we have. We can start to understand how that fits into the broader landscape of the world, and then we can start to navigate to it. And then where it gets really exciting is, on the top of that, you start to create earn-to-learn models. Right? Then you do need a blockchain. You can create smart contracts that can release funds as you complete things, as you earn credentials. And from there, we can start to pay people to learn. And earn-to-learn is brand new. We've heard of play to earn and all these different types of things. But in a future where a refugee can arrive in a country where they are lost, and they can have an ID that they own, and they can attach to that ID the skills that they already have, and then they can learn immigration training and local languages, and they can learn and upskill for the local jobs, and they can get paid while they do it. Here's a solution for solving that last mile equity challenge where free education is not enough. And in that, we can really start to build a new future.
I want to echo what you said about inviting developers to explore opportunities in education and focus on the why. Right now, there's a lot of great financial applications for Web3, and everything seems to be built around this idea of cryptocurrency and what that can do. And we're in a time where the market downturn has caused a lot of people to question, what is the true value of cryptocurrency? What is the true value of blockchain technology? And I think backing up and focusing on the why for people like us, there has been a why all along that was unattached to financial outcomes, that was focused on empowering learners and helping to support their journey. So maybe talk to us, Andy, a little bit about the why of learning. What is at the heart of learning? Like, if you are going to be a developer and you want to jump into a new educational space and learn a new tool, like, what is that motive? How does kernel help, or how do you think motivating somebody intrinsically or extrinsically plays out in a future of education?
So I think that's one of the joys of looking at the deeper reasons for why we learn any particular thing, is that you can consider like what is taken for granted in whatever environment you find yourself in. So for instance, like this notion of self-sovereign identity is a really, really cool one, because what does sovereign really mean? Right? I think that we've heard from both Chris and Evan like incredible use cases for this kind of stuff, and I'm really excited to see what you both build. But the deeper question of, okay, what am I really sovereign over, is a fascinating one to explore for all of us on a personal level, right? The notion is, there are very, very many different kinds of identity, some of which are maintained by myself, some of which are maintained by my government, some of which are maintained by my bank. I have a different degree of control and agency over each of these databases. But it pushes me when I really, really consider these things, and when I go to the roots of the word education, right, educare, to draw out what is already innate in us, this knowing about the world, which is inherently a part of each and every person. Your own experience speaks volumes about what it is that you are here to learn. And when I look at that and think, okay, well, what does sovereignty really mean? One of the key aspects for me is that I am sovereign over my emotional response, right? I'm sovereign over how I respond to the world in each moment. Yeah. I'm not necessarily sovereign over every single piece of information that the world has about me, the way that I am represented by others, the way I am seen and read in the world. And to acknowledge that there is this space in which I may be seen, represented, and read by others in ways which I don't necessarily agree with or which I don't control, and yet I still have a sovereignty over how I respond, is a really, really beautiful thing, because it implies like a mature emotional response to the world, right? Like sovereignty really rests there rather than in any particular kind of technical protocol. And knowing that primarily then allows me to think, okay, like what are the technical protocols that best represent this deep why? The same thing goes for trust. The same thing goes for value. The same thing goes for freedom, right? The primary question for all of us here is, is the technology an end in itself? Are we all here because like blockchains are the greatest thing ever and they're going to save the world? Or are we here because the technology is a means to an end? And that end is human flourishing. That end is the ability to coordinate with one another in healthy and creative ways. That end is the ability to find love. Right? Van Gogh says this in a letter to his brother in 1879. He says, I don't know much about the world, but one thing that I do know is that if you want to know, you have to love. But it must be a deep, serious, and intimate love. Right? And I think that that's ultimately, like when we're learning things, that's ultimately what it's about. It's about like intimacy with myself and then with the world. Right? That we're really here to learn that lesson over and over and over again. That notion that, you know, Evan talked to me a little bit last night about Bodhisattva, right? And I just earned to learn, by the way. That's a little... But the point about that is that, you know, we go through these cycles in our lives that teach us again and again that, for instance, leadership is not the ability to sit and speak pretty words, right? It's the ability to serve others. So you take this promise that you come back into the world over and over and over and over again to set others free. Right? And that's really what education is, because like if you look at Socratic dialogue, or any one of these like myriad of particular educational methodologies, it's always about sitting with people and drawing out of them what is inherently there already, what is their own innate freedom, their own innate being. And when we can use technological protocols that allow us to do that in a more transparent, verifiable, and creative way, that's a truly beautiful world. That's a world I want to live in. So yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree, and to sort of build on a little bit more of the technical heft on top of these ideas, I think it's important for us to reflect, to contemplate upon the role of individualism in this process. Our unique ability to change and evolve, to grow and to gain new traits, to learn from our mistakes, is the superpower that allows us to flourish, or can allow us to flourish, you know, when we leverage these technologies. Our identities, who we are as people, is not fixed. It is not public. It is not permanent. And although some out there may think that human traits are fixed and public and permanent, you know, not my clowns, not my circus, but we have, you know, very unique opportunity in this moment to consider what is the human experience we want to most enable. Do we want to tie people to their greatest mistakes for all time in every interaction they've ever made? Or do we want to create an organic and evolving path forward, clearly defined path or set of paths where we can constantly be changing? I'm sure that all of you probably don't remember everything that you learned when you were in high school. I certainly don't. And so education takes a very personalized and meandering path. And we've seen, in years past, for example, 2015, 2016, teams like BlockCerts explored what it would mean to put academic achievements publicly on chain. Fortunately, their research determined that such actions actually optimize for harm and risk to human beings, which is not what we want to do. We want to minimize risk and harm. We want to maximize individualism. And so, as Chris so eloquently noted earlier, verifiable credentials offer just the form to be able to accommodate these kinds of interactions, this kind of personal development, in a manner that can be leveraged not only in our home planet of Ethereum, but can be read and incite actions and provide privileges in Solana, in Cardano, if you roll that way, in Web2. And so an exciting thing about identity and education in this moment is that there is common ground ahead. Account abstraction, the ability to own and control oneself outside of a financial context, is something that every decentralized community needs.
Yeah, I'm just over here nodding so much because I agree in so many ways, and education is there's no way to be a maximalist in any one thing in education unless you are a maximalist about individuals being empowered and having access to tools and opportunities. I heard you comment on verifiable credentials, and Chris, you also mentioned programmable verifiable credentials, this idea of composability, this idea of consent, this idea of a two-way communication, right? If I need If I need transcripts, what do I have to do? I have to contact a university, I have to contact the school I attended, and I have to request them, right? And they have to accept my request and authorize it and issue my transcript, right? There is this sort of a moment where both parties acknowledge what's about to happen and hopefully agree on the contents of the package. But what vehicle does a verifiable credential offer? Chris, you mentioned about programmable verifiable credentials. How do you see that impacting individuals and empowering their journey?
Yeah, I mean, it changes everything. You know, I mean, when you think about it, the shift here, when you scale back, I mean, anyone that remembers what life was like before a credit card, you know, you had checks, and this is a big moment, you know, where you could pay at the pump. And the idea here is that many different individuals can exchange financial data with many different retailers on behalf of many different banks, and you can do it all in real time and with trust, right? I mean, it seems like it was not going to be that big of a deal, and it turns out it literally changed everything. The same thing has happened. You know, in fact, verifiable credentials are really the same thing. It's just a credential now instead of financial data, and that credential, again, is anything that's related to your equity. You know, in education, maybe you all don't even know that term, but if you're in academia, you talk about equity a lot. Equity is like what a learner earns, and equity is like equity challenges, like they don't have access. Equity is this word that has to do with like who we are in the world and what we earn and what we're empowered by and what is our value. And when you think about that through the lens of human capital, you know, equity has always been something that has been abstract. But what Web3, Ed3 lets us do with verifiable credentials is it lets us actually make that real. You know, it lets us as learners, we can start to earn and understand our value in this world. And that really changes things, right? Because I know when I graduated high school, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know really what my skills were. I didn't know where to go. I changed majors like so many times. And I also understand that my story is a privileged story, right? Like the reason that I was able to sit on this stage today is because I'm the type of person that when I have a goal, I will do everything I can to educate myself to figure out how to accomplish that goal. But I also understand that the reason is because my parents, growing up, told me I could do anything. And they told me that it's okay to take risks and it's okay to get out there. And I know that that's privilege. Most people on this earth don't have that access to education, access to the confidence growing up. And so what we can do with Web3 and with, you know, decentralized education protocols is we can start to give that superpower of like confidence and knowing who we are and what we're capable of and what our skills are and how we fit into the world. We can start instilling that into children. You know, imagine growing up and understanding as you're earning and as you're learning, it kind of gamifies in a healthy way our ability to collect what our skills are, to understand what skills we're missing, to understand what we can do to make an impact on the earth, you know? And when we start looking at that, by the time we get older and older, you know, we understand our value. We understand what we can do to reach abundance, to reach happiness, to reach the goals we have. And it's no longer something that happens to us. It's no longer the serendipity of education or opportunity. It becomes something that we sit in the driver's seat. And it sounds like it's all blue sky and I'm a visionary here, but that's really not true. I mean, this is the world that exists today. Verifiable credentials, the standard for verifiable credentials with W3C are there. You know, I mean, the draft standard is just about to publish. You know, identity, decentralized identity, it's there. It's ready to go, you know? And now, you know, we are working on what's called universal wallets that bring all of those together, and they're pluggable so that we can, you know, create plugins for anything, you know, whether it's a blockchain or it's a system or it's a, you know, a token protocol or a governance or an identity layer. We're in a space now where we have all the blocks. And now we just have to kind of Lego challenge ourselves to come in and create this future for the world. And really, honestly, it changes everything, right? Because when a learner and an individual, everyone's a learner, so when an individual can be empowered throughout their whole life to understand that their skills have value, this idea of a skill currency or this idea of a, you know, of a skill economy, it's not just an abstract idea anymore. It becomes something real, where my credentials and my skills have currency in the world, and I know where the currency is, that I can spend it, and jobs can understand, and we can start to solve equality issues. I mean, you know, and honestly, we spend a lot of time in the UN circuit talking about sustainable development goals, and I say if you can solve number 4, which is quality education, and you can solve number 8, which is quality jobs, you solve all the rest. Because you solve poverty, when you can start critical thinking, you can solve the rest. And so I really think that the path to a brighter future for everyone in every industry and in every geography is through better education that empowers them. It doesn't just happen to them.
So there's the open call for any developers, like, how do I get involved? Well, you can stop focusing on building, solutions for this crypto to get to that chain and to bridge to this and to bridge to that. Help create plugins, help use these Lego blocks to make the education world a more inclusive ecosystem. As you were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, I can't help but think of, so I do some travel instruction with a group called World Leadership School. And we take kids to different parts of the world to have these very immersive experiences. They live with local families. They help, they're a part of the family. They help cook, they help clean. One of the activities that we love to do is we bring out a stack of Sustainable Development Goals. And we break the kids up into groups and we put them down and say, put them in a priority order, however that might look to you, and to walk us through your thinking. The ways that they organize them, not just visually, but also the goals that are the most important, are fascinating to listen to kids. And these are kids as young as 9 years old and as old as 22, 23, who are ordering these and talking about those conversations. Well, if we just make sure everyone has clean water, then everyone will be able to grow crops to have food. If we help people just get a good quality education, they'll be able to get jobs and they'll be able to earn money and they'll be able to do this, that, and the other thing. And I really appreciate the way that you talked about these goals as sort of the vehicle to help create a more equitable world that empowers individuals to contribute to that. So I want to back up though, because we're talking about, okay, great, what we're learning here, what we're learning there, let's put it on chain, let's get this, let's get that, let's like package it all up. I'll throw it up to the group. Is it necessary to put everything that I experience on some kind of like digital world space without me necessarily knowing? Because I feel like that kind of happens now, right? It's like I pull out my phone and I do a couple things and I have no idea where all that information is going and who's using it in what ways. We're just starting to uncover that as we're reimagining education, as we're reimagining all these tools. Does everything need to be documented, verified, put on chain, not put on chain? What do you think?
Hot take, consent is sexy. I think that to the extent appropriate, especially for younger kids, perhaps the level of agency over their homework going home to their parents might not be what we need. But I think especially when it comes to our individual achievements, our traits, the traits that may be used to discriminate against us, such as our gender, our socioeconomic status, where we come from, our ethnicity, all of this information should be subject to our ability to share under the conditions that we define. Mm-hmm. I think that, for some individuals, they like to live in public. They want to put their whole lives on blast. They want to buy billboards in Times Square and put their, financial accounts, or, oh wait, that's on a blockchain. Anyway, but in all seriousness, I think the importance of empowering individuals to pursue those pathways that make the most sense for them, and for them to have the resources and capabilities and verifiable traits that can best enable their preferred journey, I think that's the way forward. And so at the core of this is the consent of the student. What tools or capabilities will they need to succeed on their preferred pathway? And I think that is what should be made available to them, what should be executed for them, and nothing more.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that it's definitely about consent, which is why, again, I'm beating the drum, but I go back to verifiable credentials. We spent a lot of time in the standards world making sure that that consent is built into this. But I will say this too. Do you want to put everything on a blockchain? No. You do not want to put learners' information on a blockchain ever. In fact, that's the beauty of the verifiable credential. Blockchains and smart contracts can help us create automation and help us do really exciting things, but no, you don't want to do that. And in fact, this is kind of a bad word in this space, but zero knowledge proofs are going to be really important in this space. And there's a big question about what's going to happen with those. But differential privacy, zero knowledge proofs, stuff like this, where we as a learner, can have my information and I can have my identity and I can have, again, absolutely nobody needs to know what my gender is, what my zip code is. All that stuff should be mine and only mine. And that's kind of the future of Ed3, is that my skills can shine. You don't have to know who I am. You don't have to know what I'm about, other than the fact that my skills are the right skills. And that's really what people want. But I'll also say this. while that is true, and I do think it's really important that we get all of that kind of stuff into verifiable credentials, because that's how we build a future where people are empowered. I also think that we don't want to create a world where everything is digital. In fact, education, he said it. I mean, education is getting together with someone and pulling out of them what's already there. And a lot of that happens in physical settings. We worked a lot with Lego Foundation to create spaces where we can create verifiable credentials around experiences in the real world. Leave now and go and do something, build something, be a part of a experience, create impact, and then come back and report, and then we can verify your experiences, And I think that we have to continue doing that, because the moment that we move education into a purely digital space, we have failed the world, because that only creates more issues.
So you're not a metaverse maximalist.
I'm an eduverse mediocrist.
One of the other things to note here is that with the focus on individualism, again, like the word itself, individuare, right? Like it means indivisible, right? And there is at the heart of individualism this really beautiful and generative paradox. It's in contradiction that we often find the deepest truths, and you find this across African philosophy, where the saying is umuntu kumuntu kabantu, right? Which really means that I am a human being, but only through other human beings. There is this notion that individuation is possible, but what individuation really means is a felt recognition of our inseparability from all things. And it's those relationships which are most interesting, particularly on shared ledgers. So when we think about our identity as something noun-like, it's some object which we hang other things off. Right? Then we're into this problem of, look, we need differential privacy, we need zero knowledge proofs, we need all number of things, because I think of who I am as some kind of static noun, some object in the world. But the body is a fluid event, right? Like there's nothing noun-like about this at all. It's at best a verb. It's moving constantly in relationship with other people, interacting in the environment, all of these things. And there's wonderful programming essays on this as well. In fact, one of the best ones is called The Kingdom of Nouns, and it's someone having a huge go at Java, which is hilarious. But it applies very, very well to verifiable credentials as well. And the notion that when you think of the stuff only as nouns, then you think of the individual as a separate and atomic unit. When you think of it as a verb, when you think of it as something related, something interacted with, something moved through, then there is this whole new vista in which you can think about particularly the programmability of stuff, right? So this notion of skills-based currency, again, it becomes interesting when it's not really learned to earn, where what I learn is somehow separated from the currency in which it's valued, because that's the heart of how inequality is bred and how the system of injustice is perpetuated, how privilege is enshrined, when instead what I learn is fundamentally linked to how it is valued in the world, which is what programmable money actually does for us. That becomes truly interesting, right? Again, like we constantly get stuck in these conditioned ways of thinking about the world where like Vitalik will stand up and say, we should use blockchains for non-financial applications. And everybody's immediately thinking about social media as it currently exists, or education, or these kinds of things. And it's not at all what I understand that to mean, right? Like blockchains are really, really good for reimagining what finance means, right? Like, Exactly. And so skills-based currency, the notion that I can learn value into existence, not learn to earn, right, as in the old model, because that's, I mean, we have that now. You learn, you get a job, you earn money, and you pay your rent, right? Like, you're all learning to earn. That's nothing different, right? But if what you are learning in relationship with others in a shared environment is reflected, the shared aspect of that is reflected in the ledger, then you can have an interesting currency which is fundamentally linked to the activities that are taking place and which is dynamically represented. If we're still stuck in this place of like, look, I'm a noun, you're a noun, we're here to like earn a little bit of money so that I can pay the rent, it never gets to that creative and dynamic place where we're actually, it doesn't even begin to touch on like intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, because like I'm just totally engaged in what's happening because I'm present, I'm here, I'm aware of what's going on because there's something interesting and I can almost smell it.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's so inspiring to hear you talk about reimagining systems, and that's what we are here to do and to talk about, is the reimagining of education in a Web3 and post-Web3 world, where there is an opportunity to see the body as more than a bucket that we're filling, right? It's a fire that we want to ignite. We want to move everybody outside of this little box or the voice in your ear to the humans that are here with us in person today and throughout this conference. And so we want to encourage you all to check out any of the workshops in the co-creation space, because the idea there is that they are going to be hands-on, engaging experiences that are going to help you learn how to think differently, how to use tools differently, how to reimagine opportunities in whatever industry that you want to be a part of. And I don't want to ignore sort of the absolute privilege that we have to talk about the altruistic dreams of reimagining education and this idea that everybody has the opportunity to engage in learning because they want to, and in industries that they feel drawn to or are passionate about. That is not lost on us, that this community is extremely powerful and privileged to be able to focus on these kinds of solutions for the greater good, for a public good that we want to offer to everybody. So I see we're kind of winding down to our final minute, so I want to put it out for kind of last comments from each one of you. Who wants to go first?
I'll kick it off. Thank you guys so much for being here with us today. I want to echo the invitation to contemplate how our Web3 world can build beyond the chain and can offer support and experiences for a broad range of audiences whose journeys differ from our own. I think too often in Web3, we rely upon emergence instead of good preparatory research to arrive at our outcomes. And so to the extent that in building non-financial use cases, we can start with ethical frameworks where we minimize risk and harm to the people who will use our tools, where we optimize for a specific outcome or experience, a pathway, a stack of tools and journeys that, when built together, deliver a human experience. Right now, we're talking about Legos in the Web3 ecosystem, and I think of Web3 as a main street where every store sells a different Lego. No store knows what other stores sell, and there is no Lego store to tell you how to stack them together. And so we have a chance now to consider what are the outcomes that we are building toward, what are the varied pathways that can get us there, what are the stacks of tools and experiences that users need, and how can we make sure that we protect and honor the individualism and capability and unique humanity of each of those people, instead of inviting them to test out our conjectures that have been held up to no ethical review measure.
Wow. Yeah.
Cheers.
So yeah, I think that's the principle of least harm is a really, really beautiful and important one for all of us. And the one that I add on the other side of that, particularly in the educational context, is infinite play. Right? Too often we get so serious about how we're saving the world and how this is very important work. And this is the antidote to privilege. Right? It's the recognition that we have a very, very clear responsibility to behave ethically and to make sure that we are genuinely following that principle of aham, so no harm. Right? And then the other side is the world is open for play. Right? This is what the whole thing is about. It's like reimagine. The thing that I got involved in blockchain and Bitcoin for the first time was we were redefining wealth. I was like, that's beautiful. What does it mean? And all wealth really means is it means having enough to share, right? And that's a truly playful way of being in the world, because all of a sudden I don't have to build the next thing that scales to 1 billion users. I don't have to, create unicorns and feel under pressure and report to shareholders and go through all of the things that currently exist in the world. All I need to do is to play with the boundaries in an ethical and principled fashion that allows me, first and foremost, instead of asking what I am doing, it asks, how am I when I'm doing this? Because if all of us here are asking about that when we're building, it's already a different world. Right? It's already done.
So I'm going to take a different approach and be very pragmatic right now, because I can't follow that. But I will say this, I've already said it, but I'm going to do it again. We need you, okay? We are building, there's a ton of a ton of opportunity, a ton of money, a ton of hunger for this in the world, and we can never find enough great talent, you know? There are ways to plug in. This isn't something where you have to show up in Ed3 and start to try to invent something by yourself without having community, without understanding. We have communities, you know, whether it's a global community in every layer, right? And we are building standards, and we're building digital wallets, and we're building earn-to-learn protocols, and we're doing so much, and we really, really need your help, you know? You can find us at learningeconomy.io, and we'll plug you in. We'll help you find a home, you know? We'll find you jobs. We'll find you opportunities. And I will say, like, I think that, you know, he said something really interesting, which I totally agree with. When I got into this, so I was in education early on, and then I built a startup, and I understood all the legacy and how terrible it is, and I said, I'm never doing education again. And so I got back into education, as one does. But when I did, I didn't see it as education, because I saw it as value technology. You know, the last 20 years have been defined by information technology, and we have this really unique opportunity to spend the next 20 years creating value technology. And when you think about value, what is more valuable than human capital, than education, right? And so this is an opportunity, I think, more than any other industry, and maybe I'm biased, but I think more than any other industry, decentralized technologies will absolutely change the face of education and employment, and that will change the face of the world. And so we need your help. Come and find us.
One more time for our panelists. And I'll say, take the invitation to take off your shoes and put your feet on the grass when somebody offers it. Have a wonderful festival and conference experience. Thank you all for attending.